mess around with. They're pharmaceutical quality, mind-altering drugs.
Yes, which can be just as dangerous as drugs off the street, sometimes more so.
Oh, more so. They have heart problems, all sorts of physiological problems through prolonged use and abuse of these things.
Well, let's explore this for a moment. You mentioned something that's quite true, Paul, that drugs aren't the only form of addiction. There's addiction to lots of things in life.
Yeah.
And some people would argue that there's addiction to running, there's addiction to pornography, there's addiction to eating, there's addiction to sex. There's a lot of things that we can arguably talk about in terms of addiction. But for the sake of keeping this contained to one area, let's talk about addiction to drugs.
Yeah.
And alcohol, and alcohol is a drug. We just say it's a very powerful one. How do we define addiction? What is it? I mean, and that's I mean, I know that we can break open the DSM, and we can look at diagnostic criteria for addiction. But as anyone knows, I know that you've done intake on people, you've done assessments on people for their drug use, and that you didn't crack open the DSM every time you did that to decide whether or not you were dealing with an addict, correct?
That's correct, yes.
So in your practice, how do you go about deciding what's an addictive problem or what's maybe a problem we would call an abuse problem?
I think addiction has there's two components. So there's a compulsive pattern of behavior. That in itself doesn't necessarily mean something's bad. I don't think that's addiction in itself. It's like you say, running, people, athletes, musicians, they all practice what they do day in, day out. So it's kind of a compulsive pattern of behavior. I think that the other part of the other half of the equation, though, is when it's disadvantageous to your life, where it destroys your career, your state of mind, relationships with friends and family, and despite all that, you keep doing it. You keep going back because something's lost in the wiring. Where I think when you scratch the surface, we're all still quite dumb animals, and I'm including myself very firmly in that. So it's very easy for our balance of short-term benefit and long-term disadvantage to go out of whack. So it's very, very simple to fall into a pattern where you might drink alcohol excessively and you feel good. But I mean, even someone who isn't addicted to alcohol will be able to tell you what a hangover feels like the next day, and it's bloody awful. So why do we do it? It's fascinating.
So what you're saying is, and the way I'm reading this, and I happen to agree with it very much, is the same way that I interpreted addiction. I skipped all the physical withdrawal stuff because that really doesn't matter. Some drugs don't have physical withdrawals to their when you cease using them, or some drugs, their physical withdrawals are so minor that you might as well say that they don't exist. But I would say that the continued obsessive use of a particular substance after the onset of severe life-damaging consequences for that use would constitute an unhealthy addiction. Is that fair?
I'd agree with that, yes.
Okay, so how do we, again, and I'm not like trying to get into the semantics of it so much, but this is a semantic argument. This is a sort of, we really have to take case by case and decide. For instance, myself, I would say I am fully addicted to being a men's advocate because I wake up and go to sleep every day not thinking of much else. Just ask my girlfriend. She'll tell you. And there have been consequences for me because of that. I have suffered real consequences for doing that, yet I have no intention of stopping. Does that qualify me as being an addict?
Whoa, that's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah, I just thought I'd throw it out there. I'm not trying to.
Well,
I can't answer it either.
Yeah, if it's not harming your general way of life, then perhaps not. But if it is, then maybe it is. I don't know the answer to that one. It is interesting though, and I think that you've touched on something important there, Paul, where a lot of people think of addiction in terms of the withdrawal. So there's a physiological dependency on a substance, and I think. And look, this is just my opinion. There's things that in all areas of counselling and psychology, there's all different schools of thought, and I think you've really got to pick what sits right for you, because there's no proving these things. But I think it's the physiological withdrawal is a very, very minor part of addictive behaviour. I think what we're talking about is, for me, it is something that if you repeat a behaviour and you keep doing it, it becomes part of you. It's part of your ego, part of your sense of self, your self-image. I am a drinker, or whatever that phrase might be in your head. And so the problem, to me, I think, is one where if you remove that from someone's life, then there's a huge sense of loss. It's like part of them has died. So I think part of treating addiction, which is very difficult to do, by the way, it's a hard nut to crack, is allowing people to become comfortable with the idea that they are going to have to let go of that sense of self, that ego that they have so strongly, that willfulness.
Oh, indeed, it's a grief process, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's taking away.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Paul. Am I able to jump in there for one moment?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, sorry.
So, sorry, Paul. Just you were asking before about whether men's rights activism or men's rights advocacy could be perhaps a form of addiction. I suppose I was having a think about it, and it's something I've asked myself before, actually. If you can overdo these things, I think. Certainly in terms of my own case, outside of my work life, because I work for a living, and outside of family, I spend a lot of my free time now on men's rights activism. And I think that that it is possible to do things. When they talk about addictions and so forth, they often talk about something impacting the rest of your life, negatively affecting your family, negatively affecting your work, and so forth. And perhaps that is something that we need to bear in mind, that if I'm doing something to the point where it's affecting my family or even affecting my work, maybe it is something to bear in mind, that we need to keep a balance at times. So perhaps it is. I think it's a really good point you've raised.
You know, it's interesting that you brought that up, Robert, because that's one of the things. I just had Anil Kumar in my home for about 3 days recently visiting, and I learned a huge amount about not only about India as a nation, but about the Indian MRAs. And do you know that they actually teach classes on pacing yourself as a men's advocate there?
Wow, I didn't realize that. That sounds like they're much more advanced than we are then.
Yeah, like about 30 years.
We need to learn a few things from them.
Yeah, and I am learning from them, and it is important. But yes, they teach their activists to pace their activism. They teach them not to burn out. They teach them to work at a pace that is supportable, because otherwise they end up like me. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But I think that raises two important points. One, to reiterate, anything can be an addiction, and it can come to a point that it's unhealthy for you. And I think Paul was absolutely right. And this is something that, you know, in 20 years of work with chemically dependent populations in Texas that I did, that was rarely raised near as often as I would have. I brought it up, but very few of my coworkers did, that if you give up an addiction, whether it's cigarettes, whether it is some other drug, whether it is some other habit that's bringing life consequences that are not good for you, you have an actual grief process to go through. As they say, even if you're married to a complete bitch for 20 years, when you get a divorce, you're going to grieve that loss, even if she was the worst person in the world, because it's still a loss. And addictions, for better or worse, become integrated, just like Paul said, into our very identities. And
I can give you a first-hand story about that. That's
Sure.
exactly what happened with me, Paul. I've been sober nearly 7 years now, and I remember my first sober day out in the world, and my marriage had ended. So there was me. The first night I was sat there on my own, and I was thinking, wow, this is fantastic, isn't it? I can do anything I want. And then I thought, what is that? What do I like doing?
Yeah.
That was one scary thought. It was like I have no idea what gives me pleasure in life. And so that's another thing. It's a learning process for an addict when they've come off a substance that's given them everything they need. What replaces that? And it's about building it up from the very ground. You know, building a solid foundation of a fulfilling life, so that you can create kind of an upward spiral. You know, you build on successes and happiness and experiences, but it's very difficult for people.
Yes, it is. I can also share some personal experience with that. In my youth, in my late teens, early 20s, I smoked probably a quarter to a half ounce of marijuana a day. Now, it was not the marijuana that they have today, but it was still staying stoned all the time. And when I quit, one of the first experiences I had was wanting to go see a movie and not knowing if I could do it without smoking pot before going in.
Wow.
Seriously, it was like, well, how do I go to a movie without my pot? How do I do anything? How do I enjoy a meal out? How do I enjoy seeing friends? How do I enjoy going fishing? Anything, unless I'm stoned. And it was a matter of having to rebuild life in my own skin, which I was not very comfortable in at the time. And I think that every addict, whatever you want to call it, every person with a substance abuse problem ends up having to confront that as a part of their recovery, is that they have to actually learn how to do life in their own skin without the help of a substance. And that's a difficult process for some.
It is, and you know, people have got to learn. You know, how do I deal with pain? Because everyone has pain in their life from time to time. But how do you deal with it? And pain's perfectly natural. Sometimes it's just a way of saying you're doing the wrong thing for yourself. It can be that. There's other sorts of pain like grief and loss or death of a family member or things like that. But how do I cope with this? How do I cope with this so it doesn't become debilitating?
Exactly. Now let me shift gears a little bit, because I'd like to zero this in on men a little bit more.
Sure.
Now, as you know, and I don't have the numbers with me, so if somebody's going to call for the research studies, you know, all I can say is Google is your friend. But I can tell you, I worked in a number of treatment facilities, many of them in Houston over a period of 20 years, and in every last one of them, men were the absolute majority of clients. That, at least anecdotally, says to me, and given the amount of men that die suicide, the people that die of overdose are overwhelmingly men, this is a problem that disproportionately affects men. The question becomes why? Why is it that men are more susceptible to problems with alcoholism and addiction than are women?
It's an interesting question, and yeah, I don't have any numbers, but and I only counsel men, but my anecdotal experiences from time to time, I talk at rehabs in Sydney, and I would agree that the vast majority of the patients are men. Why is that? I think you touched on something that we all know, and it's the same. The picture's exactly the same in Australia, and I think most English-speaking countries like Canada and the UK, where the risk of suicide to men is like 4 to 1. It's one of those things that's such a chronic, obvious tragedy that no one seems to care about, or there's no action being taken. And maybe that's part of why it affects men, because the support services for men when they run into trouble in life, there's not much out there. There really isn't.
No, men have very few avenues to turn to. I mean, they can't even turn to other men, because let's face it, I mean, as sad as it is to say, men are often their own worst enemies. I know that many men try to turn to other men when they're doing things like going through divorce, and they're only going to get so much tolerance before the message is going to be, okay, I've heard enough of this, it's time to shut up.
Yeah, and I think some of it, you know, and again, this is just like an opinion of mine, I don't know anything to back this up, is perhaps the lack of spaces for men. I mean, there are movements like Sheds movements, and there are some men's groups in Australia and the UK that I know about. But generally, men congregating with other men is frowned upon. That, you know, men are up to no good. They're plotting the oppression of women or something. It's like we can't get together without being, at the very least, mocked, scorned, and then the other extreme, banned. When you look at university societies, for example, where if there's a group of students that want to do something like a sheds association, so men get together and work with tools and things like that, and it's geared towards men, a lot of universities will say, no, we can't have that. We're not doing that. Like there's something wrong with it. That's what I don't get about society. Why is it wrong for men to gather together and just talk shit? You know, that's what we do.
Exactly. Well, there's two parts of this, and I have a theory on the emotional level and also on the physical level about why this happens. One, men don't, as a rule, tend to process emotional events in the same way that women do.
I'd agree with that.
Work together to deal with things. I mean, it's like you can get two guys on a bass boat out on the middle of the lake without 10 words exchanged between the two of them. One of the guys is going through a divorce, and just those hours on the bass boat with his friend spent mostly in silence doing something together will be a healing experience for him.
Absolutely.
It will provide something for him that he's not getting. Also, men do at times need to say things outrageous like, I'm angry, or
yep,
I'm hurt, I feel betrayed. And here's the catch-22 that we put men in that I think drives a lot of them to find chemical solutions, is that we've been telling men for the past 40 to 50 years that they need to be more like women, that they need to express themselves, and then the moment they do, we humiliate them.
You know what, Paul? This is something that I've learned a fair bit about in my counselling, because I'm sure counselling is taught the same way in America, where to sum it up, it's like if as a counsellor you can just get someone to burst into tears, then you've done your job. And you know, and I'm generalising here, but that is a more of a feminine thing. I read Tom Golden's book, The Way Men Heal, and it's a fantastic book, and it really influenced a lot of the way I practice. And going about what you're saying about the silence there, Tom talks about an Aboriginal group of people in the northern part of Australia. And it's fascinating. If a family member dies, the females in the group will get together. They'll talk. They'll cry, whereas the men will go off and they'll silently dig the grave. That's how they deal with their pain, and that's how the women deal with their pain. and we've lost that. I think there's a lot of sense in that, and I think to assume that if a man doesn't want to express his emotions, then there's something wrong with him. Maybe he just doesn't want to, but he has to have some sort of outlet, even if that's like you say, just sitting in a boat in silence healing. What's wrong with that? We shouldn't be coerced into acting the same way as women do, and the same the other way around. You know, why not embrace the diversity of genders?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I think it's real important to note that, of course, we live in an age where, you know, the only diversity between the sexes is socialized, right? So-called gender experts will tell you. That is gobbledygook. It's gobbledygook. And what Paul mentioned a moment ago, I will attest to the fact that I saw it for years. It sickened me beyond words. I think that MSWs are the worst absolute people on earth for this. But the idea that if you can get somebody to cry for you in therapy as a sign of progress is bullshit. What that is the therapist using the client to make themselves feel adequate.
Absolutely, it's a power thing, I think, and it's you know, it's if someone's coming to a counsellor to heal, is crying a necessary part of that? Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. That's okay too.
That's right. Sometimes it is. I've cried over grief in my life. I have no shame about it whatsoever. I've been angry at times in my life, and I don't have shame about that. But, you know, I had to teach myself that because the world was teaching me something completely the opposite.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we even, I even had to, you'll like this one, in my counselling studies, I had to study feminist modality, which was...
Oh, lucky you!
Oh my God! I tell you, even the women in the class found it to be insulting, because when you're talking about addiction, and a huge part of that is to take responsibility of your actions and recognise the impact it has on your life and people's lives around you, and then all of a sudden, if you're a woman, it's not your fault. It's patriarchy. You're not going to get anywhere.
Oh my God! We could do another hour on this topic. I had that same experience, and here's the deal with that. My job in counseling is to hold, especially working with addictions. The fact of the matter is that people that have addictive problems with substances violate their own values. They lie, they steal, they become people they're not, they con, they manipulate their own families, they twist things, they violate everything that's really important to them as a normal human being. And the job of the counselor is to hold that mirror up to their face as close as possible and insist that they have to look at it, but not to shame them, not to humiliate them further, but hold it up as somebody who actually gives a flying tosh about what's happening in their lives. And saying, come on now, I'm your friend here. I'm asking you to look at this and not letting them not look. That is chemical dependency treatment. Because for people to get better, they do have to take responsibility for it. And all I see them doing with women in treatment is teaching them that it's not their fault.
Yeah, and there's a lot of there's a lot of victim mentality in addiction therapy as well, where people are told that they have a disease, which I personally don't agree with. I don't think it's a disease at all. That doesn't mean
we call it a disease model because we can't really call it a disease.
Yeah, that's it. Yes. So there's a lot of there's a big victim narrative, and I find this a lot in groups like AA, which I think AA's got a purpose, especially in early sobriety. But if you see someone who's been sober 10 years and they're talking about a day-to-day struggle with their life, then there are some serious issues there. And I think part of addiction counselling is about, like you say, holding up a an objective light to how a person is living their life without making them feel like crap about it. But also, I think the big thing that's missing is give people hope. You know, if an addict can break that pattern of behavior, their way of life will be unrecognizably good. It's a beautiful thing, and I don't think that's told to people enough. I think it's all about the struggle. It's like just one. If you just get through another day, one more day. I mean, sod that. That's if you're going through every day saying, oh, as long as I just don't pick up a drink today, you're gonna crack if you're thinking that every bloody day. Whereas the reality is, the thought of not drinking or taking a drug for the rest of your life, that is fantastic. That's not a struggle. That's a beautiful thing.
And it's totally doable. I got to agree with you. We'll probably both get hate mail from AA fans. That's fine, because I agree. AA is, 1, universally available. 2, it's free. 3, it's a great support network for people, particularly, I think, during early sobriety.
Yes.
But if you're in your 10th year, going into a meeting every day with your problem du jour that you need group feedback in order to deal with, what the fuck have you learned in 10 years?
Exactly. And you know, the great thing about groups like that at the beginning, they're a social disruptor. They change your pattern behavior, because a lot of people come out of rehabs or treatment. They slot exactly into the environment that they left behind, and the environmental triggers are something that a lot of people just can't deal with in any other way, and they end up relapsing. So things like AA, they just they put a bit of a breaker into that. But yet after 10 years, why still going?
Well, it's sort of like doing counseling with people. You know, I limit the amount of sessions I'm willing to do with somebody, because there's a point with therapy that you're supposed to stop seeing a therapist.
That's right.
With your life, you're not supposed to be paying some rather serious money every week for the next 5 years to talk to somebody. If you're doing that, if you're seeing a therapist year after year, your therapist is taking advantage of you.
Absolutely. There's an incredible amount of unethical behaviour. I mean, in Australia, there's a code of ethics. And one of the things is autonomy. You want your clients to be autonomous. So, me as a counsellor, the reward for me, apart from money, because you know it's my living, is seeing someone change for the better, or change for the way they want to change and tackle life. And so if that's not happening with a client, then my personal reward isn't there, and I discontinue. I suggest that it's not working. You know, the relationship isn't cutting it for them. They should try another option. But yeah, the idea that you'll be in therapy for 10 years or 7 years or whatever is I don't know. It seems to be very widely practiced. It's counsellors want their clients sucking on their teats forever.
Yeah, let me put it this way, folks. If you can afford to be in therapy for 7 years, like unless you're a trust fund baby or something like that, but if you're functional enough to go make the money to be in therapy for 7 years, you're not that fucked up.
Can I ask you a question here, Paul?
Sure.
Because from what I've seen, the like Australian rehabs and American rehabs, it's slightly different. One thing I've noticed is the length of time. So in Australia, a lot of private rehabs tend to work on a 3-week basis. You're in for 3 weeks, then you're out, and you might have some outpatient stuff. There are some residential places that will go for longer. But from what I see in America, there seems to be a big focus on the 90-day treatment. What's your opinion on those two approaches?
Actually, the big focus in America is on 28-day treatment.
Okay.
And that is dictated by insurance companies, not by therapeutic necessity. What we do recommend honestly, in the same light that we recommend Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous as a part of aftercare for people that are discharging from residential programs, the 90 days is more of a halfway house environment. I routinely recommend it after 28 days of inpatient care, particularly with drugs like crack that are so horrifically addictive.
Wow, yeah. Yep.
That people go from a residential program into a 90-day halfway house where they start going out into the world in increments, but they're still living in an environment that at least mostly is comprised of people that are trying to stay off drugs. But the 90 days in a halfway house is not part of a treatment model. Treatment models in the U.S. are generally 28-day residential or outpatient, which they're moving toward now more and more because it's cheaper. But in the day of all my mainstream counseling in the United States, it was 28-day program for everything, and that was decided by insurance companies, not by practitioners.
Yeah. I think just going back to what you were asking earlier there, Paul, why does this affect men? And you know, I'm just drawing a couple of threads together. I've been thinking a bit, and I think a lot of men have an awful lot of pain in their lives. They have a lot of pain and a lot of dissatisfaction in their lives. A lot of clients I've spoken to, and this is the interesting thing is this is independent of what someone's earning. It doesn't matter if someone's on minimum wage or earning $500,000 a year. There's a big difference between having a job and feeling productive. And I think a lot of jobs these days are not productive. They are nothing jobs. You're not achieving anything. And there's a lot of pressure in the workplace on men. Harassment policies, bullying policies. These things take away a lot of the, I guess, what used to be perhaps fun in the workplace. I remember, you know, when I started working, it was fun. I used to enjoy it. And towards the end of my corporate career, it was just not enjoyable anymore, not fulfilling, not fun.
Same here. I wouldn't trade what I do now for anything, even with the
Sure.
consequences. One thing I'm going to point out in our 45 minutes is just, my God, that flew by quickly.
Wow.
But I wanted to say one other thing and then part with a question for you. One, I want to note that what we talked about men working together cooperatively, and I want to point out an example. We have had people in crisis at AVFM here and there several times, and we still have people that are struggling. But I want to note that AVFM is a community of mostly men who have been as screwed over in life as you can get. Our regulars that comment there are men that haven't seen their children in years, men who are living by pulling pennies out of the sofa to buy ramen noodles. I'm not exaggerating. This is the community that we serve. And during the 6 years that we've been in operation, we have not had one suicide in that group, though many men came there being suicidal. And it is, I think, because they were allowed to become a part of a community that had two factors to it. One, they could express what they wanted to express, and nobody was going to tell them to shut up. I mean, aside from if you come to AVFM and say all Jews must die, we're going to have to part ways, but something like that. But in general, they can say what they want, and two, they feel a part of a community that gets them and that is doing things. And I think that says a lot to why we haven't had to bury a whole lot of people in 6 years.
Yeah, I've read some men's forums or read some opinions of men's forums, and you know the perception, particularly from feminists, is these men are angry, and well, some of these men have been, as you say, have been through the worst kinds of shit. Some of them have been to prison for not being able to pay child support for a kid that isn't theirs.
Yeah.
And what you're going to say to that guy, you can't be angry?
Yes, watch your tone.
Yeah, that's right. You know, the trigger warning. Yeah, and what you're saying about community is right. I'm one way I sort of got drawn into men's issues, I guess, was you know, being a single man. I eventually found the Tom Leykis show, and it's a similar sort of thing there, where there's a great I mean, I think Tom does a great job on his show, and I've heard you interviewed on his show as well. But the community of listeners, which are largely men, are there supporting each other, and to, you know, sometimes to give a bit of tough love when it's appropriate as well.
Yep.
But it's just guys being together, and one of the things that, you know, that's been destroyed is the spaces for men. And, you know, when a bunch of guys get together, whether it's an online community or in the real world, you know, I think everyone comes away a little stronger, you know, enriched by the experience. And so the more areas where that happens, like the Voice for Men forum, which you know, to be quite honest, sounds like it saves some people's lives.
I've gotten emails to that effect many times.
Yeah.
Not kidding. I saved them. Each one of them brings a tear to my eyes. But I'm telling you, I have several emails from people saying I was ready to check out until I found a Voice for Men.
Yeah, because people think they're on their own, and you know,
and they're really not.
They're not.
The last example, and then we're going to need to move on and bring on our new managing editor. But I had a conversation last night, a second part, and I'm going to be broadcasting this as soon as the article comes out. A reporter from marieclaire.com who did a very nice interview with me in one phase, and then one of her editors pointed out what a horrible human being I was, and that she needed to dig deeper. And sure enough, she came back requesting a second interview, asking me questions about articles I'd written. Fine, but I gave her the answers. It's not a problem. But one of the things she brought up was tone, and that all this seemed so angry. And my answer to her was, so fucking what? It's supposed to be angry.
That's right. Anger. It's not a bad emotion all the time. You know, it's a way of saying there is injustice. I've been hard done by. You know,
I was very happy to point out to her that I've been hearing my whole life how men need to express their feelings, and it seems like the moment I did, she's ready to give me the shut up. So take that for what it's worth, Marie Claire. And to me, it's not worth much. Listen, Paul, it's been wonderful talking to you. I hope now that my schedule has cleared some, and there's some different focus now, more on these programs that we're going to be putting in, that you and I can work out something to do together in the future.
I think there's a lot we can talk about, Paul.
I do too. Listen, last question for you. Please tell anybody, especially for our friends down under, if they're going through life struggles, if they're dealing with addictions or other problems that they may feel like they could use some counseling, personal counseling for, where can they reach you at?
Yeah, I almost forgot to give myself a plug there.
Well, I wouldn't let you do that.
My website is supportforguys.com. That's support, FOR, guys.com. And there's a contact page where you can just drop me an email, and I'll get into contact with you. I'm not limited to Australia. Australians can come and see me in my office in North Sydney if they want. But I do a lot of Skype counselling with clients in America, Canada, Thailand, Japan, UK. I think that's about it.
And this is how it's done, folks. I mean, he got his plug, and I'm going to repeat it. If you want to talk to Paul Batey, inquire about his services, it's supportformen.com. You do not have to be an Australian. Also, I welcome you to visit anearformen.com, where there are services available too, but that's how we roll here. We don't compete. We work together to reach out to men who need it. And I'm very happy to be a part of the community doing that. Paul, thank you so much for your time and for your expertise. Really glad to have you on the show, and let's do it again soon.
Thanks very much, Paul. Great talking to you.
Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to roll on. We have a very important second half of this program, and if we need to run a couple of minutes over to give him equal time, we will. I want to introduce Robert Brockway, who is now the new managing editor for A Voice for Men. And before we bring him in, let me explain what that means. It means that Robert Brockway is the new Dean Esmay. I don't want to fill those shoes. I don't imagine anybody does. But nonetheless, we have Robert, and just to let you know a little bit, Robert came in some time ago, helped take over editing of the publication, has worked constantly at making it bigger and better, and he had to undig a hole in the process because we went through a long gap with very little help, very little going on. I was too busy to do it myself, and instead of looking at it and saying that's too much, Robert looked at it and said, I'll work with this, and we will make this happen. He's recruited more help. Things are developing again, improving in that area, and we're very grateful for that. So with that, I will introduce Robert Brockway and ask him to say hello to everybody listening.
Well, thank you very much for that intro, Paul. Appreciate that. Yes, we're plugging away and keeping things moving.
Man, there's a lot of Australians on this program tonight. You notice that? James, do you feel outnumbered?
No, not at all. I'm from Texas. I never feel outnumbered.
That's true. I'm from Texas, too. There's 2 Texans here. That's like, I don't know.
That's 10 people.
That's like 17 Italys.
Well, I'm Canadian, too, so I can wave to everyone in Canada as well.
Oh, excellent. Canadian, Australian. Now, that is a new one on me, but I like it. So tell me, why don't we start with this? I mean, the thing is, I wasn't kidding, and it is a difficult position for you to be in. You have my empathy from the beginning. Dean Esmay's shoes are a huge pair, and your position as you emerge through this will be more and more prominence as one of the main voices for A Voice for Men, or else you wouldn't have been asked to be managing editor, but would like to know if you could just share whatever you're willing with us to let us know who you are.
Okay, thank you. Right. Okay, so I'm probably a little bit unusual in the men's rights movement in that I didn't come into the movement because of something terrible that happened to me in the past. I've certainly, had issues. The issues that affect men have certainly affected me. I've actually had an ex-girlfriend who did commit domestic violence against me, although it wasn't of the very serious nature that many men experience. But for me, things are a little bit different. I would say I was 80% of the way to being an MRA by the time I was 18 or 19. It's interesting. I remember a conversation I had with a relative of mine when I was 14. And I mentioned that infant foreskins that were being cut off little boys were being put in cosmetics. Now I'm in my early 40s. That was over 30 years ago that I knew that. So I was obviously already, even as a teenager, I was thinking about those sort of issues. I remember in my early 20s talking about male victims of domestic violence, and I remember many people would just smile and nod when I would say that. That's, again, we're talking 25, 30 years ago. And I thought that people perhaps agreed with what I was saying, didn't think it was very important or whatever, but now I realise, and now I'm quite sure, they didn't really believe it at all. In fact, now looking back in hindsight and knowing what I know now as an MRA. So anyway, I was about 80% of the way to being an MRA by the time I was 18 or 19. But
let me interrupt there for a moment and ask you, and again, if anything gets too personal, just tell me to screw off. I get told that every day anyway.
No, Paul, really? People speak to you that way?
Oh, yes, all the time. And I'm going to have to talk to my mom about that. It's getting old. But is there something you think about the way you were raised, your earlier childhood experiences that may have pushed you toward being an 80% MRA by the time you were 18?
I've wondered this myself, actually. It's I think to a certain extent I do think it's just part of me, but there's no doubt that things did happen in my childhood that allowed me to at least tend towards that way. There's no doubt that without going into a lot of details, I think that if anything, probably members of my family are mildly anti-feminist. So I was spared that early feminist indoctrination. So at least that gave me an opportunity at least to look at things, take things on an even keel, if you like.
Okay.
So go on.
Yeah, well, yeah, that makes sense. So you weren't indoctrinated, and you were taught critical thinking from an early age.
Exactly, that's right. And so I was able to, and I've always been the type of, I suppose, a bit of a bookworm. So I would be reading a lot and so forth, and I would read about a lot of different areas, might be science or whatever, history. And I started joining the dots with these things, and I started seeing that what I knew about history from what I had read, including primary sources, was different from what I saw from the feminist historical narrative, and that's a key point for me today. Areas in science, they would say things about men, about women, and so forth. I would do research, and I would say that what I found in my research didn't match up to what the feminists were saying, for example, about men and women. So I started to join the dots over the years, as I said, but I coasted along for most of my adult life there. I recognised the problems of that there were problems facing men that weren't being addressed by society, and I recognised how central radical feminism was with feminist movement, for example. I'm getting a little bit of feedback.
Yeah, we are getting some feedback. I think it's coming from Paul, actually.
Okay, I can mute my mic, and I bet that'll help. Go ahead and speak now, and let's see if this is better.
All right, is this better? That might be a little bit better, I hope.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better.
That's better. Wonderful. Okay, great. So I definitely, from that age, I knew there were problems, and I knew there was problems with radical feminism facing society and the problems facing men and so forth. But I'll say two things. I didn't recognize the depth of the problem, and I didn't recognize the breadth of the problem. And so since I believed the problem was far less serious than it really was, I didn't stand up at that point. But now fast forward to a few years ago, things have started to get worse. Miss Andrew started to get much more vocal. Radical feminist concepts like a notion in some sort of mythical patriarchy have become much more central in society. Something that was a radical feminist notion 20 years ago is now central, is now mainstream. I hear even Christians that I know talk about the patriarchy, for example, and they certainly never used to buy into feminist arguments. So these things became much more central, and I realised that I'd underestimated the severity of the problem, and that's the point at which I realised that I needed to stand up and have my voice heard, and in particular, the publication of books with titles like "The End of Men," which talk about the problems facing men because there is something fundamentally wrong with being male. That when I realised that's where we were, I realised I couldn't be silent any longer.
That makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you this. I mean, at some point, let me ask you first, at what point did you take an interest in A Voice for Men?
Hey,
pretty
Paul,
much straight away.
I hate to break in, but Paul, you're also breaking up very, very badly. Can you check out all your connections, please?
Yeah, I can check them. I'm direct wired into my modem.
Oh boy. Because we're getting an echo from you, and you're sounding blurbery.
Blurbery?
Like you're trying to talk underwater, and it's coming up like bubble.
I'm adding that to my vocabulary.
I can switch microphones. I'm on a very powerful mic here, but I can switch mics and see if that helps.
While you're doing that, Paul, I'll explain about how I encountered A Voice for Men.
Okay, that sounds good. You do that, and I'm going to be changing mics.
No problem. So yes, so I started hearing these little whispers about these people called MRAs, and this was around about the same time that I'd seen the publication of the End of Men and so forth. And I started hearing these about these terrible people, MRAs. And like a lot of people, I was quite intrigued by these people, and I wanted to just know a little bit about them. Were they really as bad as I was hearing? So I I hit Google, of course, as we do, and one of the first sites that came up, probably the first site actually, was A Voice for Men. So I looked at a few different sites. Anyway, I sat on A Voice for Men and I read articles. This was a number of years ago. I read articles and I read comments. I didn't create an account and I didn't make any comments. My presence was completely invisible. And this was true for several months. And I gradually came to the realization that the terrible things that were being said about these people were not true. And that in fact a lot of what was being said made a lot of sense to me and aligned with things that I already believed, helped me to realize that the problem was much worse than I previously realized it to be. And then ultimately I concluded that I wanted to be involved, and so I started to post on A Voice for Men, and a couple of other sites as well. I was in the men's rights sub on Reddit, for example, and got involved there. And then of course it was some months later that well, by this time I suppose I'd met Dean and I'd met a few other people, and Dean actually approached me one day and said, would you be interested in helping us out with editing? And I said yes I would, and I came on as an editor, and the rest, they say, is history. How is your microphone problem there, Paul?
Well, you tell me, how does it sound now?
That's lovely.
Okay, well, I have a different mic on, and I guess this big Cartoid thing I have doesn't work so well just for a hangout, but we'll stick with that one. Let me ask you, was there any trepidation on your part because of the reputation? I mean, I think A Voice for Men is probably the most maligned website that has ever been on the internet. I don't think that's an understatement.
No, I think you're quite right, actually, yeah. So, yes, of course, I mean, there's two aspects, you know, I guess getting involved and getting my name out there. Yes, of course I had to ask myself if this was something that I was prepared to do. I've never been afraid of standing up for what I believe in, and I've never ever now let me say that I know some people use pseudonyms within the men's rights movement, and that's fine. We each have to make that decision on our own. I have always posted online under my own name. I've been online for over 20 years, closer to 25. I've always posted online, and so I decided when I became involved with the men's rights movement that I would in fact post under my own name, and I would take things as they come. And so yes, there was a bit of trepidation, of course, but I've continued to post under my own name, and I'm quite happy to continue doing it.
Excellent, because that is actually something that is a must for a managing editor. We can't have people that are spokespersons that carry the kind of authority that you now carry at AVFM, who are behind screen names. And it's not that I'm picking on anybody that uses a screen name. It's certainly understandable why some people are protective about that. But part of our success is that our top runners here are not people that are going to be cowed into hiding who they are. And that's very important. Now, let's set up a little bit of background on this, and I think it probably helped a lot of the listening audience to understand where AVFM has come from and where we're going, which is going to be, understandably, under new leadership from Robert Brockway, perhaps a slightly different direction. But what we've done in the past, I mean, we're going to have, if you look back at the history, you will see that we have a huge mounting interest around AVFM building up to the conference in 2014. And since then, it has lagged a little bit. It has not dropped off the map. We still have a very robust audience. We still have a lot of readership and a lot of support. But we are going to be building toward other events that pique that interest. But from an editorial perspective, from what people absorb and read on the front page, which is now under your domain, can you tell us a little bit about your vision of A Voice for Men and where you think it needs to go?
Sure. I've wanted for a while to expand the editorial scope actually to Voice for Men, and this is now giving the opportunity. As you know, we had there were a couple of managing editors before me. They were absolutely run off their feet. Now that I've got this role, I'm able to focus on these particular areas as well as keeping the regular articles going. So we'll continue to have articles as we always have. And we've got many excellent regular contributors, both among Voice for Men staff and other contributors. But there's a couple of other areas that I would like to really expand on. One in particular is the reference wiki. So we have a really reference wiki. Now this has a lot of useful links to sources that we can use to justify our positions, and also a lot of useful information. It's never been really widely publicised, and there haven't been a lot of editors, and that's something that I really aim to fix. I also have quite a bit of written material that I am going to be contributing to that reference wiki as well, and publicising that. So we'll probably be looking at doing something like publicising it in a similar way to the way we do Hole on the Web at the moment. Now the reason that I want to do that is because I find that even among, I mean, the men's rights community is quite a disparate and broad group of people, and we don't all agree on everything. And there are areas I find even within the men's rights movement where a lot of people perhaps have some misconceptions about perhaps some historical reality, for example, based on the documentation we have. And so this is an area where I think the reference wiki will be really useful. There's a term that I think I'd like to borrow. It's actually called deepening, and the idea is that you get to understand the area you're working in our case activism. You get to have a deeper understanding of it and the background of it, and a better grounding, if you like. In particular, one area where I really want us to look seriously is the feminist historical narrative. It's so pervasive that even many MRAs buy into parts of it, in my experience. They actually have leaked out the way that women were treated in the past, for example, that just don't stack up to any sort of reality and any sort of evidence. And this is an area where I think the reference wiki will really benefit us. So we can, there's a lot of information there already. There's a lot more to come on that page. We'll be featuring information from those pages, and we'll be talking about the way that men and women and children worked during different eras, the way that when women and children were working together in factories will be some of the things we'll cover in articles. Voting rights, that's so for example, we often hear about women's rights to vote. In fact, men's rights to vote were often curtailed as well. A lot of people don't realise that in the UK, for example, there was only a 10-year difference between when women were fully enfranchised, when men were fully enfranchised rather, and when women were fully enfranchised. So men over 21 became fully enfranchised in 1918 in the UK. Women over 30 were given the vote, and in 1988, 10 years later, women over 21. Well, even a lot of MRAs don't realise that while yes, it's true that women didn't have the vote, in many cases, neither did men. And in most cases, I can't think of a single example right now where this isn't true. The difference between full enfranchisement of men and women was not more than 50 years. So those are the types of areas that I want to get out with the reference wiki. Now, some people may think it's a bit dry, and it probably is at times, but I think it is important stuff for us to know. And this will be the stuff we'll be featuring on the website a lot more.
Some of it is dry. And it's, you know, that's the nature of studying history, is that a lot of it is going to be dry material. But I think also what you said is a very good direction for AVFM to go, because we do have that problem. I mean, and we have that problem on a larger scale than we often want to take a look at. I was watching, I'm going to be releasing later tonight a video that is a response to some things from Sargon of Akkad. I'm not shooting him with two barrels. I really love the guy. But one of the things that came out in his recent interview with Cassie J was that MRAs don't do anything. What is the sort of reaction when you hear that MRAs don't do anything?
Well, I really have two comments to that. First of all, I disagree with the premise. I think we absolutely do things. We have extremely limited resources. But despite those limited resources, MRAs that I know personally are out helping men in many different ways. I know several active MRAs that are starting men's shelters, for example, in the United States. There are various other ways that men, that the MRAs are working actively to help men, despite not having two pennies to rub together. But the other aspect, the other comment I would have on that is that our ability to help men directly is extremely limited, while the society doesn't accept that the problems exist. So it seems to me that the focus of our activity has to be on education at the moment, on changing the public narrative and on changing public policy. If we started approaching politicians and tried to get, for example, money out of the budget to go and do these activities, and the public aren't supportive of what we're doing, we're not going to get that money. We need to get people to understand what the problems are, to get those discussions happening, and then we can start getting much more active in really addressing these problems, because by then we'll have wider support in the society and support from the government, and that's what we need.
Do you think it's important when you're talking about voting history to also include, this is something that is not brought up because of course I've heard every feminist under the sun say her great-grandmother couldn't vote. And of course a lot of men's great-grandfathers couldn't vote either, but that's a wasted conversation on them in most cases. But it's also true, is it not, that the right to vote for men was tied to the obligation of conscription and availability for conscription.
That's right. That's as I understand it. That's in fact that point in particular is a point that I personally have on my list to research a little bit more thoroughly. It's that the right to vote was often tied to land ownership, and that's true for men as well as women. And in fact, there's an interesting case was uncovered in the UK recently. Early 19th century, a voter record was found recently and uncovered, and they found among the men that were listed to vote as landowners, there was a woman who was listed to vote as an landowner. Now, I believe, from memory, 28 is in my mind, but I'd have to check what the actual year was. But I do have a reference to that if we need to dig that up. But having said that, yes, I've certainly my understanding is that at least in some cases that was true. That there was certainly linkage between the right to the right to vote and the requirement to defend the state. This is an area that I think I need to research a little bit more, and I would like to nail down a few more of the parameters around that. In fact, that's something that I think we could put up on the reference wiki in the near future, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to see it there, because I know that I've made the statement recently, and I'll make it again. I've done a little research on this. I may be able to. I can point you to some sources on it. But right now there is litigation in place from the National Coalition for Men are suing the federal government over the fact that the selective service, as it stands, is a violation of the 14th Amendment. And it clearly is, given that it targets only one sex. But if the litigation is successful, if either the draft or selective service is abolished, or if women are required to register for selective service and required to serve in times in war, like men are, it will be the first time in American history that women have earned the right to vote. In the past, it has been nothing but a gift to them with absolutely no responsibility attached to it whatsoever. And I do not say that to be insulting to women. I'm saying that because it's historically accurate.
That's an excellent point. In fact, I was pondering selective service recently. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe American men must register from 18 to 25 for selective service.
I think it's 18 to 24.
24, okay, right. So in effect, an American woman, a United States citizen woman, gains the right, barring felony convictions, gains the right to vote at 18. It seems that a United States citizen, a male United States citizen, gains the absolute right to vote at 24 then. So versus, up prior to that point, it's a conditional right to vote, as I understand it. Because is it not true that if they don't register for selective service, they can't enroll to vote? Is that right?
That is correct. If you break the law, the selective service law, you lose your right to vote. You can also be subjected up to 5 years in prison and fines of $250,000.
That's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And I can't see any justification for being selective on gender in that regard. Even if the United States government were to have an argument about whether they're going to force women to go to war, there's simply no reason not to draft women, because the vast majority of roles in the military are not frontline combat roles.
Precisely correct.
Yeah.
There is all kinds of MOSs in the Army, or MOS just being Army jargon for what your job is.
Yep.
There are all kinds of service jobs, even during times of combat, that do not require people to take up arms and go to the front lines or go to any part of the lines. That is the biggest part of military involvement. You're right, the smallest part is actual frontline ground troops. I don't believe personally it's a very good idea at all to mix women with men in combat. I think the dynamics are all wrong for it. I think it will end up getting more people killed to do that. But there are plenty that women can stop their lives for, just like men have to, and go off to serve their country in a time of war. And it is time that they start being required to do that alongside the men.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you look at militaries around the world, they measure their efficiency in the ratio of frontline combat soldiers to the number of support soldiers they have. And my understanding is even the most efficient armies in the world have several support soldiers for every single soldier they can put into combat. There's plenty of work to do for women.
Indeed there is. So we're going to be looking forward to that, and I know that we have been working on, we continue to work on a way to make the wiki information a lot more prominent. I'll note that yesterday I heard somebody say that MRAs don't have statistics on their side. I'd love the idea of a link to that wiki as a response to that statement. Without just saying anything else, just link them to the wiki and they can find all the... And there's already a good deal of information there now. I mean, this has been worked on quite a bit. But with what you're bringing to it, I think it's going to be a great thing.
Absolutely. Go on.
Now, is there anything else about the future of AVFM, our form of activism, the tone of our editorial content that you would like to see in the future?
So there's one other area that we're looking at that I'll just briefly mention. As we know, a lot of sites are turning off comments, and one area we considered, I mean, we'd be interested to know what feedback we get actually on this particular point now that I mention it. We're talking about perhaps having a way for people to comment on articles, maybe articles that you post on the web. You could comment on those articles on the site. That would give you a place you could comment, even if the article itself on some third party has disabled comments. So that's the second major area that we're looking at for the record.
I'm sorry, could you try that one more time, and I'll turn my microphone off because you were echoing through that.
Oh, sorry, you dropped out there a little bit. Yes, we're looking at offering a way for people to comment on articles where the site itself, third-party articles, where the site itself is not allowed comments, as increasingly that's the case. So if we post something on the web, then there'd be an opportunity to actually comment on those articles and have a discussion on those articles at AVFM.
Ah, right. That's an excellent suggestion, because we do notice more and more that as the men's movement narrative enters the mainstream, and where comment sections now are so vastly different than they were 3 years ago. The misandric articles now get called out. The craziness of feminist orthodoxy gets called out in the comments. So what a lot of people have opted to do is just turn off comments so that nobody can speak. And if you've got a way for a workaround on that, I would love to see that at AVFM.
Definitely, we're working on it. Look forward to it in the near. You can see it in the near future.
Excellent. Let me say this, and we're running close to closing time. We got a few minutes, but we are getting sort of close to closing time. Can you give me your perspective? And again, this is what AVFM readers will want to know, because one of the things that we have been known for is being, I'll just say, a little blunt. Is that something you would like to see continue at AVFM, or change, or soften, or harden? What's your take on that?
So you can't argue with results. That's my attitude to this. AVFM hit the ground running, and it made waves, and it got people to notice. It got people to looking, and it's spawned. In many ways, it spawned the size, certainly the size of the modern men's rights movement. It's got people thinking about and talking about what we're doing, and so from that perspective, I'd say we've absolutely got to continue to get in people's faces. Absolutely, we're going to do it based on solid stats and data and so forth, but we're absolutely going to continue getting in people's faces, because that's the only way we're going to change the cultural narrative.
Well, I'm glad we agree. That's a real relief. I really, because folks, these are not prepared questions. Robert and I did not, pre-screen questions. I didn't tell him what I was going to be asking. This is just right off the cuff, all of it. And when I asked that one, I held my breath and had my hands together, saying, "Please, please, please."
So, Paul, I just want to jump up with one last comment there. I'm honestly, I'm not a get in your face kind of guy personally. I'm actually really a negotiator, and I have to say, as I said, when I started reading AVFM, I couldn't argue with the results. That's the bottom line as far as I'm concerned, and that's why we're going to get in people's faces.
Agreed 100%, and it's not, to point out, there is a lot of people at AVFM that are not more of the personality that I have, or that you'll see from August Lowenschulz or some of the other peoples who are more in-your-face people. We're a really diverse group of people with different ideas and attitudes. David King, for instance, will rip people to shreds as politely as you would expect from most Brits. Or I'm talking to an Australian, can I say Palm?
Yes, you may say that.
Okay. We'll go with that direction. But he rips people to shreds with very, very logical arguments, and deconstructs them and puts them in their place in a very polite way. That's part of our approach too. But let me throw this one at you as we're closing into the end of this one, because we're seeing a new phenomenon that you point out. I know that you've noticed that AVFM, we jokingly refer to them as our children. There's now, if you open up any page of Breitbart, you might see stuff that would have been on AVFM 5 years ago. If you look at some of the other social commentators, I won't name them all, but you will see the same rhetoric that we've been going at for 6+ years at AVFM, and now it's starting to be popularized in other areas, and these are largely by people who sort of hold their nose up at us, even though they're standing on our shoulders.
It's extraordinary.
It's really fun to watch that, and there is going to be, I just made a very friendly correction the other day with Skeptor, and he may not call it a correction, but I challenged something that he said, and it was very, what I would call gentlemanly. We got along fine. We're still Skype talking and everything. There's no hard feelings. I'm going to challenge Sargon of Akkad a little bit in the video I'm releasing later tonight, and in that same video, I'm going to rip a new asshole in Julie Borowski for doing a shit piece on us in the Libertarian Republic, where basically what she did was take on the David Futrellian approach of saning the internet for a few comments from nutcases who called themselves MRAs, and then holding them up and saying, here's the men's rights movement. And normally Julie Borowski is somebody that's fairly close to the same page as us. And we're going to have to call some of that out too, I think. So what's your take on that? Because what we're seeing is people who are basically echoing our rhetoric and then saying, but we're not one of those guys, pointing to us like we have leprosy.
Well, we've been leading the way. The Voice for Men's been leading the way, and Voice for Men is going to continue leading the way. And that means, as I said, still putting things like articles out and so forth, but also talking more about providing people with good historical information to base their arguments on, good data to base their arguments on, making our arguments stronger. That's really where I want to go.
Well enough, and gents and ladies, I think you just heard exactly why Robert Brockway. By the way, I got a note from Dean Esmay after he saw the announcement that you had been selected, and it was a glowing. I mean, I got to take all the glory because he called it a brilliant move, and him being the one that brought you in, him being the one that watched you work, watched your work ethic. Watched your approach, your intelligence in doing this job. I did not consult with him before asking you to take that position, but after he saw that you had taken it, he wrote me specifically to say, job well done, best possible pick, and I have no doubt that Dean Esmay was absolutely correct. And so with that, just two things to say to you. One, thank you for bringing your talent and your willingness and your skills to help AVFM move forward into its next chapter in its existence, and to let you know that I have all the confidence in you that position and the authority that comes with it implies. So for anybody who's mistaken about this, Robert is not just like a guy that heads editing. He's the managing editor for A Voice for Men. That makes him one of the main voices for A Voice for Men, and I personally think we have chosen wisely.
Thanks very much, Paul. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I'd just add my voice into that. I think Robert has been kind of holding a lot of men's movements together in Australia for a while, and I really enjoyed what he had to say about. I mean, if he does nothing else, just doing a fact-based wiki, it would be so useful for anyone involved in this.
Well, I tell you what, if anybody wants to check out what's coming, you can look at the masthead at the top bar of A Voice for Men. You'll see a wiki link there. We do have a wiki that has been there for some time. There's some great stuff in it, but Robert is talking about beefing this thing up with actual facts, so many facts that it will embarrass Wikipedia.
That's right.
Exactly. And he'll do a great job at that. And with that, I think I'm going to wish both of you gentlemen a good evening, and thanks to both of you. Paul, I look forward very much to speaking to you more about us doing more on men's mental health issues together. I think that's an important topic that we need. In all the things, in all the nothing that we do, maybe we'll devote more time to talking about men's mental health issues and reaching out to them with stuff that may help them whether they seek counseling or not. And then we'll donate the millions that we make off of the videos to another good cause. And with that, thank you both. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another edition of A Voice for Men News and Activism. And lest I be remiss and forget, there is something that James Huff needs to tell you, and it is very important advice indeed. So, James, please take it away.
Everybody, take the red pill.
Activism, the tone of our editorial content that you would like to see in the future?
So there's one other area that we're looking at that I'll just briefly mention. As we know, a lot of sites are turning off comments, and one area we've considered, and we'd be interested to know what feedback we get actually on this particular point now that I mention it. We're talking about perhaps having a way for people to comment on articles, maybe articles posted on the web. You could comment on those articles on the site, and that would give you a place you could comment, even if the article itself on some third-party site has disabled comments. So that's the second main area that we're looking at for the record.
I'm sorry, could you try that one more time, and I'll turn my microphone off because you were echoing through that.
Oh, sorry, you dropped out there a little bit. Yes, we're looking at offering a way for people to comment on articles where the site itself, third-party articles, where the site itself is not allowed comments. Just increasingly, that's the case. So if we post something on the web, then there'd be an opportunity to actually comment on those articles and have a discussion on those articles at AVFM.
Ah, right. That's an excellent suggestion, because we do notice more and more that as the men's movement narrative enters the mainstream, and where comment sections now are so vastly different than they were 3 years ago. The misandric articles now get called out. The craziness of feminist orthodoxy gets called out in the comments. So what a lot of people have opted to do is just turn off comments so that nobody can speak. And if you've got a way for a workaround on that, I would love to see that at AVFM.
Definitely, we're working on it. Look forward to it in the near. You can see it in the near future.
Excellent. Let me say this, and we're running close to closing time. We got a few minutes, but we are getting sort of close to closing time. Can you give me your perspective? And again, this is what AVFM readers will want to know, because one of the things that we have been known for is being, I'll just say, a little blunt. Is that something you would like to see continue at AVFM, or change, or soften, or harden? What's your take on that?
So you can't argue with results. That's my attitude to this. AVFM hit the ground running, and it made waves, and it got people to notice. It got people to looking, and it's spawned. In many ways, it spawned the size, certainly the size of the modern men's rights movement. It's got people thinking about and talking about what we're doing, and so from that perspective, I'd say we've absolutely got to continue to get in people's faces. Absolutely, we're going to do it based on solid stats and data and so forth, but we're absolutely going to continue getting in people's faces, because that's the only way we're going to change the cultural narrative.
Well, I'm glad we agree. That's a real relief. I really, because folks, these are not prepared questions. Robert and I did not, pre-screen questions. I didn't tell him what I was going to be asking. This is just right off the cuff, all of it. And when I asked that one, I held my breath and had my hands together, saying, "Please, please, please."
So, Paul, I just want to jump up with one last comment there. I'm honestly, I'm not a get in your face kind of guy personally. I'm actually really a negotiator, and I have to say, as I said, when I started reading AVFM, I couldn't argue with the results. That's the bottom line as far as I'm concerned, and that's why we're going to get in people's faces.
Agreed, 100%. And it's not to point out, there is a lot of people at AVFM that are not more of the personality that I have, or that you'll see from August Lowenstrolz or some of the other peoples who are more in-your-face people. We're a really diverse group of people with different ideas and attitudes. David King, for instance, will rip people to shreds as politely as you would expect from most Brits. Or I'm talking to an Australian, can I say Palm?
Yes, you may say that.
Okay. We'll go with that direction. But he rips people to shreds with very, very logical arguments, and deconstructs them and puts them in their place in a very polite way. That's part of our approach too. But let me throw this one at you as we're closing into the end of this one, because we're seeing a new phenomenon that you point out. I know that you've noticed that AVFM, we jokingly refer to them as our children. There's not now, if you open up any page of Breitbart, you might see stuff that would have been on AVFM 5 years ago. If you look at some of the other social commentators, I won't name them all, but you will see the same rhetoric that we've been going at for 6+ years. at AVFM, and now it's starting to be popularized in other areas, and these are largely by people who sort of hold their nose up at us, even though they're standing on our shoulders.
It's extraordinary.
It's really fun to watch that, and there is going to be, I just made a very friendly correction the other day with Skeptor, and he may not call it a correction, but I challenged something that he said, and it was very, what I would call gentlemanly. We got along fine. We're still Skype talking and everything. There's no hard feelings. I'm going to challenge Sargon of Akkad a little bit in the video I'm releasing later tonight, and in that same video, I'm going to rip a new asshole in Julie Borowski for doing a shit piece on us in the Libertarian Republic, where basically what she did was take on the David Futrellian approach of saning the internet for a few comments from nutcases who called themselves MRAs and then holding them up and saying, here's the men's rights movement. And normally Julie Borowski is somebody that's fairly close to the same page as us. And we're going to have to call some of that out too, I think. So what's your take on that? Because what we're seeing is people who are basically echoing our rhetoric and then saying, but we're not one of those guys, pointing to us like we have leprosy.
Well, we've been leading the way. Voice for Men's been leading the way, and Voice for Men is going to continue leading the way. And that means, as I said, still putting things like articles out and so forth, but also talking more about providing people with good historical information to base their arguments on, good data to base their arguments on, making our arguments stronger. That's really where I want to go.
Well enough, and gents and ladies, I think you just heard exactly why Robert Brockway. By the way, I got a note from Dean Esmay after he saw the announcement that you had been selected, and it was a glowing, I mean, I got to take all the glory because he called it a brilliant move. And him being the one that brought you in, him being the one that watched you work, watched your work ethic, watched your approach, your intelligence in doing this job. I did not consult with him before asking you to take that position, but after he saw that you had taken it, he wrote me specifically to say, job well done, best possible pick, and I have no doubt that Dean Esmay was absolutely correct. And so with that, just two things to say to you. One, thank you for bringing your talent and your willingness and your skills to help AVFM move forward into its next chapter in its existence, and to let you know that I have all the confidence in you that position and the authority that comes with it implies. So for anybody who's mistaken about this, Robert is not just like a guy that heads editing. He's the managing editor for A Voice for Men. That makes him one of the main voices for A Voice for Men, and I personally think we have chosen wisely.
Thanks very much, Paul. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I'd just add my voice into that. I think Robert has been kind of holding a lot of men's movements together in Australia for a while, and I really enjoyed what he had to say about. I mean, if he does nothing else, just doing a fact-based wiki, it would be so useful for anyone involved in this.
Well, I tell you what, if anybody wants to check out what's coming, you can look at the masthead at the top bar of A Voice for Men. You'll see a wiki link there. We do have a wiki that has been there for some time. There's some great stuff in it, but Robert is talking about beefing this thing up with actual facts, so many facts that it will embarrass Wikipedia.
That's right.
Exactly. And he'll do a great job at that. And with that, I think I'm going to wish both of you gentlemen a good evening, and thanks to both of you. Paul, I look forward very much to speaking to you more about us doing more on men's mental health issues together. I think that's an important topic that we need. In all the things, in all the nothing that we do, maybe we'll devote more time to talking about men's mental health issues and reaching out to them with stuff that may help them whether they seek counseling or not. And then we'll donate the millions that we make off of the videos to another good cause. And with that, thank you both. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another edition of A Voice for Men News and Activism. And lest I be remiss and forget, there is something that James Huff needs to tell you, and it is very important advice indeed. So, James, please take it away.
Everybody, take the red pill.